Welcome to the Free Flowing Health Podcast, where we invite you to embark on a transformative journey towards a healthier, happier, more fulfilling life. Each episode brings you a dynamic exploration of the diverse aspects of health, wellness, and healing. I'm your host, Lisa Brown. Join me as I engage in intimate conversations with inspirational guests who share their unique stories and insights. These conversations will take you beyond conventional thinking, encouraging you to break free from the constraints of a one-size-fits-all healing approach. Our mission is to empower you with the knowledge, tools, and motivation needed to inspire real change. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Let's go. Welcome back to the Free Flowing Health Podcast. Today's guest is Reverend Todd Glacy. Currently describes himself as an Enlightenment Advocate, Empowerment Educator, and Instigator of Joy. I love that. As a speaker, musician, facilitator, mentor, and minister, he loves nothing more than sharing his passion and talents for bringing people together in creative community and inspiring them to tune in and reconnect with their truest and best selves in order to experience life with a greater sense of peace, purpose, happiness, and well-being. Welcome to the show, Todd. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I call it an enlightenment advocate as opposed to an enlightened advocate, because whether or not I'm enlightened depends on what's happening at the moment, I suppose. But yeah.
Well, I guess we could begin with your story then, just a little bit of how you got where you are today. You can tell the audience a little bit about what it is you do in a little more detail. Anything else you'd like to share that you feel relevant before we dive a little deeper?
Yeah. Well, I feel like life has just been a journey, and there's been certain key elements in my life that have always been sort of inspiring and motivating. And, music has been a huge thing that I've always been a part of. And I find that music and spirituality really kind of are almost the same thing for me in a lot of ways. And so my path's gone on a whole lot of twists and turns and adventures, and I've spent 45 plus years as a professional musician. I've also a licensed professional counselor. I spent 10 years as a school guidance counselor and being an ordained interfaith minister. But it's all just, the bells and whistles and trappings and certifications that go around just trying to live a life of curiosity and creativity. And I think sharing that, as I get older and realize what are we here for, and it really is to, help enlighten, light up, inspire, bring joy to people. So yeah, it was really hard for me when people ask, well, what do you do? And, the sort of the elevator speech. And it's like, well, it depends on, because I like to do a lot of things. But the thread of that really came down to, what I said in the bio, that really it's about, advocating for people to find who they are and why they're here, empowering people to, live their best lives and just to spread smiles. So
Yeah, and you're doing that because your energy is already electric, and I feel it.
uh,
And yeah, we could throw all of the labels right out the window.
yes,
I often
exactly.
struggle.
So
I struggle as well when somebody asks me what I do, since I do bring so much experience and so many different modalities to the table, and it's different on every single day, and depending, who I'm working with and where they're at, where I'm at. So I can relate to that. You and I met at the Love Light Festival probably several years ago at this point. I have no concept of time. I remember we were at a drum circle and you were trying to teach me how to play the drums and, trying to be in that flow state and that whole thing. So I want you to talk a little bit about how the spirituality intertwines with music and how that has, really
mm,
inspired you on your path.
yeah. Um, well, it goes way back. I find that I've had this conversation a lot with people lately about, you know, why are we here and finding our meaning and purpose. And I'm kind of the current belief that, we all come into this life, into this, reality with certain things that we're wired for, certain gifts and talents that, we have. And with hindsight, I can look back and see and remember things that sort of pointed me in these directions from a real early age. Um, One of the stories I tell is So drums have been my thing for, you know, ever since the beginning. But I have this vivid memory of being 4 years old. And I used to go to this nursery school when I was 4 years old. My parents sent me to this nursery school, and it was in the basement of this church. And the only thing I remember about nursery school was one day there was this stage in the basement of this church where this nursery school was, and the curtain was open a little bit, and behind the curtain was this red sparkle drum set. And I was just so focused on, I wanted to go up on that stage so bad and see that drum set, because I had a drum set at home, of course. But why there was like this moment of just like boom, and so at 4 years old, the fact that I have this vivid memory of that, I look at that as like, wow, maybe that was a clue of like, this is something that, and so then you start looking at these things that sort of inspire you on the spiritual angle of it. I can remember being a kid and just, I grew up in upstate New York, in the southern Adirondacks, and, woods everywhere. And I would just like be sitting there in the yard and looking at a blade of grass and thinking about, there's something, like just this curiosity about what is life and why, how does it all work? And so I think the thing about music is I was really fortunate. And again, I really feel, I love the title of your show, Free Flowing Health, like the idea of flow, and how when we relax and step back and allow rather than try to force our way through life sometimes, it's kind of like we're almost being guided. Things show up. And in my life, when I look back at that, things have always kind of just shown up and worked out, and you don't know where they're going to go or end up. But then when you look back years later, you're like, wow, okay, so if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have done this, and blah, 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 blah. So the thing about both of those, and especially with music, was um, there's this thing, this mystery to it. Like there was a lot of music in my house growing up with my mother and stuff, and I was always encouraged to play, and I was just always obsessed with listening to music and things. And as I look back, I think there's like a magic, like we used the word magic earlier. There's
Yeah.
something magical about music and sound, and it's the same thing with spirituality and mystery and magic in the world. And so I've just come to think that they're really so closely related, that music is a way that we can bring magic into the world. It's a way that it impacts us in ways that other things don't. So taking it really seriously, that music can serve as a catalyst for so much, health, well-being, awakening, fun, you know, whatever the intention is behind the people that are making it, I guess. But it's that creativity. So I think this is the big thing I want to
Yeah.
probably focus on is creativity, like our imagination, these things that, like having this imagination and this artistry and this creativity, and that being the reason why we're here, because as humans, we dream and we have ideas and we create things. We are, the physical manifestation of creation happening here on earth. And so I take that very seriously, so what is it that I'm bringing in, and to do it consciously and
Hmm.
to do it intentionally. And music is just one way that for me has been really powerful, really effective, really joyful. And and it's a way that for me is easy to express and be in that flow state. It's like meditate. It's like any of those. It's a practice for me. It is like a spiritual practice on top of everything else. So there's a
That was
long-winded
such a
answer to your question.
Such a beautiful answer, and I like that you bring up that, the creative process, being in the flow state, looking at, the puzzle pieces that were there all along, instead of, feeling like you have to do and force and make things happen, to really surrender into that knowingness that we are guided from a higher plane. But a lot of people I see are struggling, whether always or nowadays, just kind of with no purpose, thinking they're too old to pursue their passions. They have no clue what they're even passionate about, trying to find some sense of meaning. So, what kind of advice or how would you encourage people, no matter what age they're at, what they've experienced, and wherever they're whatever they're currently dealing with, where would you tell them to begin?
Yeah, well, this goes back to my guidance counseling days. What do you want to be
Yeah.
when you grow up? You know?
And we're never truly grown up.
Well, that's it. I still think, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, but yeah, I think for me and what I've learned and found to be true is it's really valid the question of when you were a kid, or even now, but especially when you were a kid, what was it that you loved to do? Like, what did you spend when you didn't have to do anything? What would you what were you inclined to spend your time doing? What is it that lights you up and brings you joy? When you don't have the pressure of having to do things, like for me as a kid, going to school was such a bummer because I had to focus on what somebody was telling me to focus on, and I would rather be daydreaming or whatever it was. But when you have those times, what is it that really inspires you? There's a great quote that I have. I think it's attributed to Picasso, but it was basically the meaning of life is to find your talent, your gift. That's it. It's to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So you find
Oh, I
that
love it.
thing. Yeah. So like we were talking about earlier, you find that thing. Like if we go with the premise that we're all sort of pre-programmed to have a certain talent or gift that we have, and we're all unique, so whatever we do, whatever we're doing, it's unique to us, even if we're all doing similar things in whatever way. It's like we all have our own unique expression of that. But to really find that, I mean, and that is so important to giving meaning and purpose in life, because you're right, so many people, when we don't have that, then life just becomes this thing, and then we get all low vibration or whatever you want to call it. But when you're tapped into that, to your passion, it just, you can feel it, right? Like we were talking just a minute ago about, you wake up in the
Yep.
morning, you just have this energy and you're excited, and you can't wait to get started. And so I think that we have this built-in guidance system to let us know when we're on to that. It's kind of like going on a treasure hunt, and you can tell when something is really resonating with you. You can just feel it. And to give yourself, so then the challenge of course is, first is the awareness of what is it, and then the second thing is clearing away all the garbage and muck that prevents us from actually doing that. There's so much that we hear like nah, 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 um, that we have to consciously and intentionally put energy into breaking through that and allowing ourselves to express. Music's a great example where how many people were growing up were taught you can't sing, or you're not a musician, or you can't play, or you don't have any talent, and so then they drop it. And I know a lot of people. This is one of the great things about drumming. Even when you do a drum circle, you don't have to know that much about music, right? But you just come and you play, right? You play music. You don't work at music, you play music. And you see how people, once they get over that internal chatter of, "Oh, I can't do this," and they let go of it and they start playing, and then it's like, they have you just see the lights going on, right? And so, yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, of all the things, and especially when you're talking about health and well-being, because when we're not living into our purpose and our talents and our gifts and our bliss, as Joseph Campbell would say,
Oh yeah.
like that's a downer, and that's when people get depressed, and just, yeah. So it's really important. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And it's really about awareness and giving yourself permission to follow that, regardless of what other people might say.
Yes, and feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and knowing that failure is knowledge, it's information to help empower us to learn from the experiences that we're having so that we can continuously show up. For instance, I don't know if you remember, but it's very vivid in my head that moment that I was full of fear, even, as one of those people, so afraid to bang the drum, thinking that, oh, I'm going to be judged. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to look stupid. I don't want to look like a fool. But I remember that you encouraged me to go ahead and just join and play off everybody's energy. And it became this, you know, uh, you know, intertwining of energies, and it was so beautiful. And I went on to go get a djembe, which to
You
this
did.
day, I don't know if I know how to play it, but it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about just doing it, being in that flow state, feeling it in the moment, and like working through that fear. So, what do you have to say about just moving ahead courageously and knowing that fear is a normal part of human existence?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I was thinking about that a little bit. The idea of in a lot of ways we are our own biggest block to what it is that we might really desire or want. And everything you just said is a perfect example of that. Because one of the big fears, like when you ask people, what is your biggest fear? I mean, and this gets to a really big question that we can get into, but when people are asked like, what is their biggest fear? One of the fears is being afraid of being humiliated in public, right? So so how much does that stop people from doing things? um, and so that's where, and when we think about fear, there's a whole lot of levels to fear, of course. On a very basic level, fear is a very useful thing. It keeps us alive when we're in danger and stuff. But there's a point where, and this again, we keep talking about awareness. We have to be aware of what's going on, because otherwise we're just being controlled by these emotions and states. But the idea of fear as false evidence appearing real. So
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
there's real things to be afraid of, like, oh, I'm just about to get hit by a truck, I better get out of the way, versus, oh, if I hit this drum wrong, I'm going to be publicly humiliated and I'll never be able to live it down and my life will be ruined and blah, 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 right? So, you have to, find what's real and what's not. And the whole false evidence appearing real is that so much of the time we're making up stories in our head, to keep ourselves safe, which isn't a bad thing, but you have to keep that balance of like, where's the safety versus where is when is it becoming detrimental? When is it blocking me and preventing me from moving forward and being happy and getting what I want versus just keeping me safe? And so there is courage. Courage is really important because it takes courage to step out of that comfort zone. And this is an ongoing practice that we have to do, is find those things, and just bump it out. It's about expanding our, ability to be comfortable irregardless of what's going on. And one of the things that we see in society, I spent many years in media, producing television and things like that. And we used to teach media literacy. And one of the things that we learned, and it's even more relevant nowadays, is this idea that, when you used to watch the media, and even now, so much of it is fear based, right? Everything is like,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
afraid of this, be afraid of that, fear, 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 fear. And when we're in fear, we know that, our state, we slip into the, sympathetic fight or flight. And
Yep.
when we're in that state, our mind and our system operates very differently. We become very narrow, very, focused
Contracted.
on,
Yes.
yeah, versus when we're in relaxed, our creativity flows, we can sleep better. There's all these things that happen. But with what they found in media is that, okay, if it's news and we have all this depressing news, if it bleeds, it leads, and all this fear, and then we have a bunch of sports, that gets people all fired up. But what they find is that, when you pump people full of fear and uncertainty and powerlessness and hopelessness, and then you show an ad like, oh, buy this car, take this drug. So they call it retail therapy, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're all stressed. I can't do this, but I can spend money on something and it'll make me happy for 10 minutes. And we fall into this addiction. And so again, being aware of how we might be being manipulated by that, or how we're, manipulating ourselves. Like, am I buying something to try and make myself feel better? So it's just all these things that we can fall into. But yeah, I think, again, awareness, like what is it that I'm afraid of, and what's on the other side of that fear. It's kind of like, it has to motivate me to go past it, and it can be really hard to break out of it, especially when you've allowed yourself to become conditioned that the fear is the primary motivator. That safety zone. So yeah, it's a tough one, but it's a practice.
Yeah, and then that's why I haven't watched the news or owned a TV for 20 years. It makes
I
perfect
know.
sense.
It's like, yep. It's
No, but
it's
coming back to even the nervous system and that negative feedback loop, it's like once our adrenaline is pumping and our hormones are out of whack and we're in that constant fight or flight, which obviously can be useful for survival purposes. And, do you know about the vagus nerve?
I've
The
heard of
largest.
it. I haven't studied it specifically, but tell me a
Yeah.
little
So
more.
no, just when we're in this constant state of arousal and fear, it affects the largest nerve in the body, which goes all the way from the base of the skull down through, innervating every single organ and supplies our body with information, basically. So it can be really healing and therapeutic, just, for a full body reset. And you can do that through vagal toning, through music and chanting and singing and that sort of thing. Also,
Mm,
things like cold plunging and just
mm,
being aware of what you're taking in and through certain meditative practices. So, yeah, that's a whole nother episode, but just,
yeah.
relating how on a physiological level, how fear lives within each cell and each tissue of the body. So, in theory, it's easy to say, just change your ways, feel the fear, and do it anyways. But I do understand that there's so much more, and we need to be aware of what we're taking in, whether it's through the television, the radio, the people that we're surrounding ourselves with, the food that we're putting into our body. It all affects that mind, body, and spirit connection and our ability really to evolve and move past the fear and be able to make real progress in our lives, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I mean, one of the things, so I used to, I still do like sleep coaching 'cause so many people have trouble sleeping. And, stress and anxiety is rampant. I mean, in any field that I've worked in, whether it was the school or, with, spiritual directions with people, it's this idea of stress and anxiety is it gets to a point where we don't even know that we're stressed. And this is one of the things, when I was working as a counselor, teaching about emotional intelligence, like
Hmm.
understanding what emotions are, which basically is just energy in motion. It's energy and we feel it in our body, and then we give it names like anger, fear, happiness, whatever. Um, and the fact that there are no good or bad emotions, they all just are. But the important thing is that they're giving us information, as to what's going on. So when I'm tuning in and paying attention to my body, and this is where meditation and things like that come in
Hmm.
so handy. It's like, wow, I'm feeling really stressed and I can feel it in my gut. And it's like, okay, so what is it that I'm stressed about? And so when we talk about, mind, body, spirit, I basically, when I teach like there's four quadrants to wellness. There's the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual, and they're all tied in together. Like we have to pay attention to all of them equally because they all impact each other. And so when we're having stress, first of all, the key to everything, like we keep saying, is awareness. Like first thing you have to do is realize that you're even stressed. And then I think my experience with a lot of our society is that people don't even realize it because we're not usually taught this stuff. So we just go through life constantly stressed and then wonder why we're sick all the time or don't feel good. So how to be able to regulate that? And so like what you're saying, like toning, there's a gazillion techniques to
A
help you
gazillion.
relax, right? But finding stuff that works for you, like being aware, knowing what stress feels like, knowing what relaxation feels like, so you can tell the difference. And then it is actually, because what happens is it really comes back to our mind, right? And when you think about I'm stressed about something, it's usually because we're thinking about something a certain way. So when you notice I'm stressed, then it's like, okay, well, what is it that I'm stressed about? And so then you go into the mental piece of it where it's like, okay, well, what am I thinking? What am I telling myself? What am I paying attention to? What am I focusing on? And I used to have this giant remote control that I would have in my office when I'd work with kids, and they'd come in all stressed and anxious. It's like, you know, your thoughts are kind of like a TV station. You can change what you're thinking about and focusing on. So it's just like changing the channel on a TV. So right now, you're thinking about something that happened on the playground and you're all stressed out about it. And it's like, how do you divert their focus to something else, right? And one of the key things that this will tie in with everything is one of the key things that I found that works the best is gratitude, right? You just stop
Mm-hmm.
and you stop what you're thinking about and you say, okay, what are three things I'm grateful for in my life right now? And it switches the switch, and automatically it's like, oh yeah, okay, you're interrupting that thought pattern. It's like the hamster wheel and whatever else. Like you say, we're reprogramming our basically our neural pathways in there because we do form thought habits of things that we constantly think about. It's interesting, they say we have like 20, 30,000 thoughts a day,
Oh
but
yeah.
then how many of those are actually original and how many of them are the same thought over and over, and how many, so, when you start paying attention, this is, why these spiritual practices are so useful. It's like, well, what am I thinking about all day long? And, well, is that making me feel relaxed or stressed? Is it encouraging me? Is it depressing me? So we have all these choices that we can make. So, but yeah, being able, awareness, and then being able to relax, because in all my experience and work with sound healing and all these other types of things, it's like people, our bodies are designed to be in a relaxed state most of the time. When you look at nature, right? I mean, that was that example. Like you study nature and you see animals, and perfect example is a cat getting ready to like attack something, say, and it's like it's all tweaked up and it's all the adrenaline's flowing, and then it goes after the squirrel or whatever, and if the squirrel gets away, or say the squirrel gets away, and then the cat's sitting there, and like, what does the cat do afterwards? It starts
Yep,
chilling out,
yep.
right? The cat doesn't thinking, why did the squirrel run away? Why doesn't it like me? Oh no, what's wrong with me? As humans, we have this thought process, but as animals, they have that burst of that energy, that fear, that fight or flight, whatever it is. But once that's gone, then
It's
they
gone.
yeah, they reset back. And as humans, we don't, because our minds like are always tweaking in that. So, and that's why we have so many health issues, I think, is because we're constantly in that state. So being aware of it and being able to bring ourselves out of that into relaxation. So, for me, when I teach and work with people on this, it's like, what's the quickest, simplest, easiest way? Awareness, take time all the time to step back and notice what you're thinking about. Be the observer. And then the other thing is, when you notice you're stressed or anxious, just practice some gratitude, and within 30, 60 seconds it can shift you over into that, at least get you out of the stress thought path for a little bit. So those are two things that seem to work really
Yeah,
well.
especially for kids and adults alike. It's a practice
Exactly.
that I still put pen to paper, and I have a gratitude journal,
Yep.
which I should probably carry it around with me. And I know it sounds cliche or cheesy, but whether, in the moment trying to interrupt that thought pattern and alter your perception and then eventually your mindset as a whole, because it comes to a mindset shift,
Yes.
even just putting it to practice either in the morning or night takes less than a minute of your time to set the energy and intention for your day, or to go to sleep and set the intention or energy for the next day. So I found that really extremely helpful, especially when we do get caught in that downward spiral of sometimes negativity, because we're all human,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter how spiritually enlightened we may consider ourselves at times, or experienced or evolved. It's at the end of the day, we all go through shit. We have to work on things. And I know that I struggle consistently also with negative thoughts and having to work diligently on my mindset. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's all a practice, like you say, like, um, you talked about mistakes earlier, and it's, we learn from our experiences. And so one of the things to be able to do is not be overly judgmental, of
Mhm.
ourselves, because, you know, this is another thing, back from the school stuff, is like, we learn from our mistakes. Mistakes should be celebrated. A mistake is
Yeah.
just, you do something and you don't get the result that you intended. You know, you tried something and like, oh, I ended up over here instead of over here. Well, that's really valuable information. You know, how do I go back and like, okay, well, what if I made this choice? Where would that take me? Because, you know, life is just an ongoing succession of choices that we make. You know, we're constantly making choices about everything. You know, what word is going to come out of my mouth next? What am I going to, you know, and they impact our experience of reality. And so again, being aware of that, like how conscious are we when we're making these choices? And so one of the things, you know, as a spiritual practice that's really interesting is, you know, in Islam, they have the call to prayer 5 times a day, where
Uh-huh.
those 5 times everything stops, and you stop and you step back and you refocus. You know, you don't have to necessarily pray to Allah, but if you stop and step back and just be grateful for, you know, if we had like a timer and did that every once in a while, just to interrupt that and remind ourselves like, oh yeah, no
Just
matter what's going
breathe.
on, it's like I've got so much to be grateful for. And you find that, for me anyways, I shifted that because I used to be very like, you know, I think, you know, it's part of growing up, you know, 20s and 30s is like, you know, you realize the world can be a really shitty place and there's a lot of shitty people and I don't like a lot of stuff. But then you find that that becomes my frequency that I operate at, and that's not healthy. It's not happy. It's not, you know, helping make things better. And so when I spend my time thinking about everything that I'm grateful for and all the, you know, looking forward to things and looking at the beauty everywhere and just, you know, some people say, oh yeah, well, it's da, da, da. But it has a real impact on how we experience life, which then has an impact on how we impact life around us. You know, when we talk about being an enlightenment advocate, it's not like necessarily trying to do anything for anybody else. For me, that is about us being our most lit up
Hmm.
selves, right? Like when we are doing what it is that brings us joy, then that's the energy we're sending out. And that really, you know, if you believe in resonance and all that stuff, that impacts the world around us. And it's like just by us being that, these beacons of, you know, joyous
Beacons of
high
light.
vibration,
Yep.
you know, certain people are going to be attracted to that and influenced by that. Certain people, it's not going to have any impact on. But that's really what it is. Again, it's not trying to force it on anybody. It's just being, you know, being that, and knowing that that's the energy that I'm putting out into the world, and that will hopefully inspire others to do that in themselves, and then more and more people light up and
I love that. Basking in your beingness as opposed to trying to force or push your agenda upon people,
yeah,
because that's gonna send them running. And plus
yeah,
it's not our place to say what's good for anybody else. But I like to operate the same way, where I just live my life, try to be the best human possible, and constantly work on myself, and with the hopes to inspire the people around me through a natural process of osmosis, or call
yeah,
it what you will.
yeah.
So yeah.
It, and I find that right there is a full-time job. Is keeping Todd. It's like almost like, you know, worrying about
It's
everybody
hard. It's
else's.
hard. It is really hard work, I must say.
Yes, it is. But it's yeah, it's why we're here, I think, you know. We're here to to find that, and you know, why not? I figure whether life has meaning or not, we know that it's temporary. And so what is it I want to spend my time doing while I'm here? And I might as well have a good time rather than, you know, you know,
Yep.
whatever the other choices are. And you know, the thing I think is that, you know, you'd mentioned earlier that no matter how, you know, enlightened we might think we are, how spiritually advanced, it's like, you know, life is designed to constantly be pushing those buttons. You know, right when you think you got it all figured out, something comes along, you know, the cosmic 2x4 whacks you
Yeah.
upside of the head. It's like, oh, now I got to deal with this. But it's always an opportunity to practice. And again, when we're talking about wellness, it's this practice of how do I, you know, find that equanimity within myself, you know, to use a yoga term. It's like, how can I stay calm and peaceful, irregardless of what's going on out here, you know? And this
Right.
is a real, I mean, it's a real practice. It's a real, I don't know what the word
Yeah,
is.
because
It's
challenges
yeah.
will occur, bad things will happen. Just as an example, in the last few years, dealing with a sick parent and having to watch them regress, and moving to a whole new state from New York City to Florida to be with my mother as she passed.
Mm,
A couple of months later, the pandemic hit, so I'm in a brand new place, starting a brand new business, not knowing anybody, then getting hit with a category 5 hurricane. And it's just like boom, 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 one thing after another. And if I didn't have the experiences that I've had or the tools in my toolbox, and
mm,
I, just let myself get distracted with numbing agents, like back in the day when I was a 13-year-old rebel,
mm,
alcohol, drugs, whatever it was back then I'd be lost right now. So, part of being on the path, finding purpose, living a life that is full of meaning, it's also experiencing rough circumstances, struggle, challenge, and knowing that it's all an opportunity for growth. Everything to me is an opportunity for growth, whether, I'm receiving an attack on Facebook, or it's something like my mother dying, right?
mm.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional environment and experienced a lot at a young age that was really traumatic. And, instead of that getting the best of me and basically setting me off on this path of destruction, I found these different tools and techniques along the way, whether it was through deep yogic or meditative practices, through changing my diet, through incorporating certain daily habits, whatever it is, it's like it's not without the challenges and the struggle.
Yeah. Well, and we talk about resilience. I mean, the ability to to have those challenges. That's what, when you study, physiology and muscles, right? If you never engage your muscles, they just atrophy and become useless. You need resistance. You need, challenge to keep them, strong and fit. And then mentally, it's the same way. If it's great to be happy, and happiness should be our set point for health. But if life was just always happy and hunky dory, it would be really boring,
Right?
And
We wouldn't even be here, I don't think, at that
it'd be
point.
like, how
Yeah.
boring is this? Everything
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
exactly the way I want, right? So yeah, to look at all these things, and again, it's kind of interesting, you know, when we think from the spiritual perspective, how our how we make sense of the world trickles down into our mental, our emotional, and our physical well-being, and so that's why, the sort of the areas I operate in, which are more the spiritual mental areas, is really about, what are my beliefs, and we form these, and they evolve as we go through life. And you're right, there's so many, I don't want to say traps, but there's things that we can, there's paths that we go down, whether it's, you know, organized religion, drugs, blah, blah, blah. There's so many things. And for me, I've always been curious. So it's kind of like a research project. Oh, I'll try ayahuasca. I'll do all these things because I want to have that experience. But at the end of the day, it's always about, those things are not in and of themselves the answer. And it's also very possible that at a certain point they are no longer going to serve me. So how do I not get stuck
Mhm.
in there and move on? There's two really important stories like that. One is, if you read the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is about the Buddha, and how there's a part in the story where he and his friend join this ashram, and there's a guru, and he learns all these things from this guru. But then at a certain point, Siddhartha realizes, I've learned everything I can learn here. I need to move on. He tells his friend, and his friend is like, no, you can't leave, and blah, blah. And you realize that a lot of religion is like that. Like, you join this group, and then, if that the message isn't serving you, it can be really hard to leave.
Right.
Same with, if it's drug addiction or whatever, you have a certain group, you become identified with this, and it's really hard to leave. And this is where courage and facing fear comes in. It's like the idea that the path to enlightenment is a solitary path. Like, we're all climbing the same mountain, as to use a metaphor, but we're all walking our own paths because our experiences are all unique. Um, and so, one story that was really interesting. This was a personal story about a friend of mine. He was talking about how, and this goes to my judgment as well. But it's an idea of how something can serve us in a moment, but then becomes, actually destructive. So he was talking about how when he was a teenager, he had a stepfather that was physically abusive to him, and he got so bad when he was a teenager that he was actually out in the woods with a loaded pistol, ready to take his own life. And a friend of his came up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "I can't take it anymore. I'm going to end it." He's like, "Oh, don't do that. Here, have a beer." And so he had the beer, and it felt better. And so alcohol actually saved his life. But then 20 years later, he's an alcoholic, and so then he
Right.
has to break that connection. So the story about that is that everything is it's choices, like we talked about. It's making choices, it's steps, it's progressions, and it's really about being able, we talked about awareness, how awareness is such a huge key. Being able to step back from my story, so I can look at Todd from like this, God perspective, if you want. Say, well, what's going on? What's Todd thinking about? What's Todd doing? Is that really good for Todd, or does Todd need to do something? So being able to have that observer perspective and even talk to yourself as a third person, which is a great practice. Like, oh, well, Todd's hungry right now. People look at you like you're weird, but it's like it helps you disassociate from your story, right? We get so
Right.
attached to our story of who
Right.
we are and what's what, that to be able to look at it from this bigger perspective can be really helpful. So yeah, it's yeah, awareness and courage, because a lot of times it takes a lot of energy to break out of something that we've become comfortable with, even though we realize that maybe it's not good for us anymore.
Right.
And everything that's associated with that, whether it's where we live, who we associate with, what our belief system or affiliations are, whether it's a sports team or a political party or, all these things, there's so much pressure to stay with it. But
I
yeah.
resonate so deeply with that, especially okay, so we're talking awareness, courage, and then also the dissolving of identities and labels.
Mhm.
I'm still in my 30s, but a lot of experience with a lot of different groups, and I can say that yeah, I life is one big experiment. So when I was 13, 14, 15, experimenting with alcohol and drugs, it did serve its purpose of as a numbing agent, and it helped me get through my days without taking a bullet to my head. And then eventually I had to assess and refine and redefine and say, hey, this is not good for me. And that's where I found weightlifting and other things that were more healthy choices to help me deal with whatever was happening. And then as I grew older, just that deep sense of wanting to belong and being part of community. So, I mean, I denounced organized religion long before I was even a teenager, but then even, getting drawn into things like the Kundalini yoga cult and wearing all white and feeling like this was the yoga of awareness and this is the only path to enlightenment. And having experienced that in a multitude of ways, you know, in the 30 something years that I've been alive. And then at some point, like, I had to step back and say, "Is this serving me? Is this just, a militant, belief and all caught up in ego? And is this really my deeper, knowingness or way to really discover who I am and what I'm meant to do on this earth?" So, it can be almost like breaking up in a relationship or just that realization that this is no longer serving me and having to separate yourself either from community or a substance or a habit or whatever that thing may be that's kind of controlling your thought process and informing your decisions and whatnot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And, so then we get to the last piece of health and wellness, which is forgiveness, right? Like we have these experiences and, it's natural that we discover something and it makes us feel good. And so we go all in and we really, we get into it and we're all like on board and dressing the dress code and
Yeah.
all that stuff,
Following the rules. Yeah.
following the rules. Yeah. And then, when it gets to the point where, we have the awareness that, well, okay, this kind of has served its purpose and now it's becoming unhealthy for me to stay here. So then we leave, which, like we said, can take a huge amount of courage. But then it's being able to kind of clear up the karma, so to speak, of like, and I love this quote. It's attributed to Oprah. I don't know if Oprah did it or not, but it was this the quote that true forgiveness is when you can say thank you for the experience. And I thought
Ah,
that's
nice.
really good because when you can look at back at whether it was a relationship, a group, an experience, any of these things, when you can look back and you've done the work of grief and forgiveness to basically move through that, learn what it is you were there to learn, let go of, all the icky stuff that comes from, when we feel we've been had or if, there's anything like that. But being able to look back at it and say, thank you for the experience. That what we've been saying ultimately everything is here to help serve us in our own growth. And that I think that's spiritual mental maturity. Is being able to look at things and realize that things are always changing. Things come into our lives. Things go out of our lives. Everything is change. Nothing is permanent, right? So um, yeah, the gratitude again of being able to get to a point because otherwise we get stuck in the past, and when we have
Yeah.
resentment and guilt and things like that, those are things that again kind of weigh us down and don't, serve us. But they're indicators. It's like, okay, if I'm feeling, regret or guilt, that means I still have some work to do to reach forgiveness. Forgiveness is like freedom, so yeah, it's
And we
all a
forgive for
process.
ourselves, right?
What's that?
We forgive for ourselves. It's like that
Yeah,
idea of holding a hot stone and holding on to anger and resentment, but really it's burning you up inside.
that's
So
right.
really we're forgiving to free our own minds, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people have a hard, like, especially if you're talking about abuse and things like that. It's like, it's not that you condone the behavior, but at a certain point, the only person that it's really hurting is you by holding
Mhm.
on to that, and so here's the last, big piece that I'll share with you is, you know, going through counseling, becoming a counselor and also a minister, one of the biggest things that they talk about is self-care, and how in order to serve others, you have to be in your best thing. And in our society, they look at selfishness as a bad thing. Like, oh, you're supposed to always focus on other people. If you're focusing on you, then you're being selfish. And I'm here to say that that is why we're here, is to work on ourselves, to make ourselves the healthiest, happiest thing we can be, because otherwise we can't help anybody, right? If I'm dealing with shit that's blocking my ability to, be and experience joy and love, then what am I bringing to the world? And so, really, our primary job is to accept responsibility for ourselves and our own health and well being. And then again, that is what we bring to the world with the work that we do, anybody we work with, anything we're involved with. And, selfishness is, you know, somewhere along the line that became a negative thing, but it's vitally, crucially important, is in my mind. And you see that in health industry and everything else. It's like if you go to the hospital, everybody's burnt out and they're
Oh
overworked,
yeah.
and you're like, wow, this is supposed to be a place of helping people get healthy, and the people that work here aren't even healthy, So yeah, so give yourself permission to take care of yourself first, so that you can be the most effective you when you're working with others would be.
I say that often that selfishness is required in order to be selfless. I
Yes.
think it's a big part of filling up our own cup. Again, as cliche as that sounds, but we can't
Yeah,
show up fully and be able to be present or to give, from a space of peace if we're not taking care of ourselves.
that's right.
One thing I'd like you to talk about, I know we're nearing the end, is any kind of programs you have out there, or you could just talk about how people can get in contact with you and what capacity you work with people, whether through music or counseling, or what it is that you
Yeah.
do now.
Well, today, let's see. Yeah, I have a lot of little things, none of which I actively am promoting too much, but I do, a little bit of spiritual life coaching. I do some, like I mentioned, I had a sleep master program that I've worked with just because sleep seems to be such a big issue with people. Just to, kind of help people navigate through that. Um, do a lot of music stuff as well.
Is that only in person, or do you work with people virtually and with
Yeah,
that
so
modality?
with the coaching and things like that, I do that virtually. The music is all real. I've had a hard time
Yeah.
dealing with getting good music over the internet. So I
Okay.
do, gong journey work and things that use sound, and for me, it doesn't translate over the internet very well. So, but I'm really involved in a lot of that. I do a lot of kirtan and gong things and sound and whatnot. But I guess if people are interested, and they want to contact me, they could just contact me at my email. It's just Todd, Todd, at toddglacy.com. And if you're curious, just shoot me. I love to hear from anybody and see what's going on. And we could go from there. And
Or they could tune in telepathically, or they can astral travel and maybe connect with you that way.
yeah, depends how receptive I am, if I have to have my antenna up, but yeah, no, I love to connect with people. I mean, I'm on Facebook too. I mean, probably Facebook's a good place. People are on Facebook. Just Todd Glacy, and yeah, that's usually where I post events and things that are going on if you're in the New England area. And yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. So, and always
Cool. And
happy to
let
hear from people.
Awesome. And last question is, what does free flowing health mean to you? I'm going to end the show every single time with every guest, just to extract their unique perspectives on what
Yeah.
comes to mind when you hear
I
free
was
flowing
thinking
health.
about that because I thought that was a great thing.
Hmm.
Free flowing is just getting being able to clear ourselves to be as open to inspiration. Inspiration means in spirit. And
Hmm.
when our energy is open, when our minds are open, when our bodies are flowing freely, that's when we experience the best type of health. So we want to look for resistance, and those are the things we want to work on, whether it's resistance, whatever it is. And we're moving towards enlightenment. What feels light?
Always.
Yeah.
Cool. And any last tips, tools, advice, that you'd like to leave with the viewers? Maybe anybody struggling with finding their purpose, or this sense of I'm lacking creativity and, I'm just feeling hopeless.
Find joy, find something that feels fun, that's healthy for you, an activity, something, and creativity, right? If you look at everything you do as a creative act, play with it, have fun with it, whether it's picking out your clothes in the morning or making breakfast, everything we do is a choice and a creative act, and be grateful that I'm here today and I get to have these choices and these experiences, and thank you, thank you, thank you. And there was a great quote from somebody, I forgot who it was, but they said, if the only prayer you ever say is thank you, that's enough. I
Right.
like
So
that.
staying open, curious, playful, maybe not taking ourselves so seriously, and finding
Yeah,
joy in even one activity, that we're engaging in on a daily
yeah,
basis can be a
yeah.
first good step, right?
Keep it simple. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your energy and being here with me for the last hour. It just flew by.
Yeah.
Just really amazing to reconnect. I know we haven't spoken in a while, so I appreciate your beingness. I appreciate your just everything. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you too, Lisa, and everything you're doing, and keep up the great work. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Free Flowing Health podcast. Your support means the world to us. Help us grow by leaving a positive rating and review. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share this podcast. If you'd like to stay connected, you can find me on social media at Free Flowing Health, or visit my website directly freeflowinghealth.com. Wishing you a happy, healthy, and fulfilling life. Till the next time.
This podcast is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, health, or professional advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional or medical advice. Views and opinions expressed by the guest are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the view of the host or the Free Flowing Health team.